Hi, I'm Paul Arthur. This is Bridge City News. Here's a look at some of the stories we have lined up for you tonight. 2 people are dead and at least 6 others wounded in a mass stabbing at a First Nation northeast of Winnipeg. Members of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees get a 12% wage hike and more in a new 4-year deal. And there were some heated exchanges over COVID as the U.S. Health Secretary appeared before the Senate Finance Committee.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News.
Thanks for joining us. Members of the Hollow Water First Nation in Manitoba are in a state of shock after a mass stabbing. 2 people are dead and 7 others were wounded in 2 separate attacks early this morning in the community about 200 kilometers northeast of Winnipeg. RCMP say one of the dead is an 18-year-old female and the attacker was her brother.
We can confirm, sadly, that an 18-year-old female has died as a result of these injuries. Following the stabbings, the suspect, who was Tyrone Samard, who was a 26-year-old male from the community of Hollowwater, fled the community in a stolen vehicle and fled south towards the community of Black River. The vehicle was located by the RCMP near Black River First Nation, traveling south on PR Highway 304. It was at this time, when the vehicle was located at approximately 6:53 a.m., that the suspect collided with the RCMP cruiser that was driving northbound towards the scene to respond. The suspect, Tyrone, succumbed to his injuries on scene due to the fatal motor vehicle accident. The officer driving the police car northbound was injured and was transported to hospital with critical but non-life-threatening injuries.
The families was very close to me. And my deepest condolences to the family right now. So I'll pray as hard as I could for the recovery. And that's all I'd like to say right now. Community to get together, do their prayers, support one another right now.
The attack comes 3 years to the day after a mass stabbing on the James Smith Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, which left 11 people dead and 17 injured. Federal Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne says adjustments are coming to the public service as Ottawa looks to trim its spending in the fall budget. Champagne and other cabinet ministers are huddling in Toronto for a second day of meetings with Prime Minister Mark Carney, preparing for the fall session of Parliament in less than 2 weeks. Repeating what the Prime Minister stated earlier this week, Champagne says the current level of spending is not sustainable.
Folks at home have been tightening their belt for quite some time. They said, if I do it, the government has to do it as well. So having a leaner and more efficient government to provide services to Canadians, that is needed as you're looking to rebuild this nation for the 21st century. Well, you will find adjustments because you have to take it, when you look at these things, you have to look at the trend. We've been adding a lot of people over the last few years, during the COVID period. So you're looking at adjusting. But at the same time, the point is really about using technology, delivering better services, making sure that Canadians find value for money. And it's about time that we are straight with Canadians. Canadians understand that. I want to be straight with Canadians. Prime Minister was straight yesterday. Tough choices ahead, but ambition when it comes to investment, rigor when it comes to spending.
Canadians will have to wait for the fall budget next month to see where those cuts will land. And speaking of budgets, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre can't wait to see one. He says while Carney talks about cutting spending, he's doing the exact opposite.
So far, we've got from Mark Carney is radically higher spending. He's not only increasing spending over Trudeau's numbers, he's increasing it at an increasing rate. Remember, Justin Trudeau had pledged a deficit of about $42 billion for this fiscal year. Mark Carney, without even introducing a budget, might be as much as 100% above that. So nobody should be talking about Mark Carney's austerity. Everyone should be talking about his hypocrisy. He's doing exactly the opposite of what he said he would do.
Also today, the Carney cabinet met behind closed doors with representatives from polling firm Leger. Pollsters Jean-Marc Leger and Sébastien Dallaire shared their latest polling with cabinet, which shows that tariffs are now a lower priority for Canadians.
First, the most important one is a year ago, tariff was the #1 issue. And that's one of the reasons why this government has been elected. Today it's changed. Tariff is only the 4th one. Tariffs rank 4th in Canada. So this is important. People are less afraid of tariffs and Trump. So this is the first element. The second one is concerning the economy. All the priorities are linked to the economy. So if government fight against tariff, citizens fight against inflation. So what is the priority? Inflation, of course, cost of living, access to affordable housing, and of course, commercial relationship with the U.S. are the 4 main issues. So to understand that at the end, economy is at the center of this government. So that's the point #2. And after that, we discuss about a lot of decisions that the government want to take about the infrastructure program, for example. People are favorable of this project, but they need more information. So because they're talking too much about the how, but they have to explain the why.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is sending an MP to China to push back against canola tariffs. Parliamentary Secretary Cody Bloys will join Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe on a trade mission to China later this week. Beijing hit Canadian canola seed with a nearly 76% tariff last month. The move was widely seen as a response to Canada's 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. COVID was a hot topic of discussion today in Washington, D.C. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. appeared before the Senate Finance Committee. While he was there to defend the government's new vaccine policy, some senators had other questions.
In fact, do you accept the fact that 1 million Americans died from COVID?
I don't know how many died.
You're the Secretary of Health and Human Services. You don't have any idea how many Americans died from COVID?
I don't think anybody knows that because there was so much data chaos coming out of the CDC, and there was so many perverse incentives. And these are model
You don't know the answer of how many Americans died from COVID. This is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Do you think the vaccine did anything to prevent additional deaths?
Again, I would like to see the data and talk about the data.
You have had this job for 8 months, and you don't know the data about whether the vaccine saved
and
lives?
that's the problem, is that they didn't have the data. The data by the Biden administration absolutely dismal.
So who is politicizing? You're saying the Biden administration politicized all the data? Go back to what Senator Cantwell just said.
Fired Dr.
Go to the Trump Surgeon General.
They fired Dr. Kraft. They fired all the people who question the orthodoxy.
Kennedy's testimony follows a week of fast-moving shakeups at the Centers for Disease Control. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has introduced a policy which significantly narrows access to COVID-19 vaccines, a move that precipitated a public fallout and ousting of newly installed CDC Director Susan Monarez. 4 top CDC officials also resigned in protest. Global Affairs Canada says it's aware of 2 Canadian citizens missing in Lisbon, Portugal, where at least 17 people died in yesterday's crash of a 19th century streetcar. Another 21 people were injured, including 1 Canadian. The streetcar is a popular tourist attraction that carries passengers up and down one of the city's steep hills past picturesque views. Members of a group called the Kingdom of Canada have been arrested in Saskatchewan after reports of firearms being present. The cult-like group is led by the self-proclaimed Queen of Canada, Romana Didelot. 16 people were arrested yesterday in Richmond, Saskatchewan after RCMP executed a search warrant at a privately owned decommissioned school.
The search warrant was obtained after we received a report of an individual occupying the building was in possession of a firearm. That report was received on August 25th, 2025. We carefully examined the components of the property prior to the execution of the search warrant. This maximized the likelihood of a quick, smooth, and safe operation. The buildings were cleared and all individuals were arrested by 6 a.m. The next phase of the investigation is now in its early stages. Investigators are still in the process of searching the building, collecting evidence, and interviewing those arrested. We have located and seized 4 replica handguns, 1 inside the building and 3 inside vehicles. So what I can say is that one of the individuals that was inside the building identified herself as Romana Didulo, which was, as I understand, live streamed.
So just to let everyone know, there's the corporation RCMP, that calls themselves police, screaming outside saying you're under arrest, put your hands up and come towards me and nothing will happen.
Many in the community west of Regina have complained about the group being disruptive. RCMP say they have 24 hours to either lay charges, bring people before the courts, or release them. Members of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees have ratified a new 4-year contract with the government. 71% of the 23,000 eligible members cast ballots, and 63% of those voted in favor of the mediated settlement. Union President Guy Smith says workers will get a 12% wage hike over 4 years, with some adjustments to the pay grid.
There were what we call, or the government called, called market adjustments, which attached higher pay to certain classifications. There was a number of other benefits, financial benefits that impacted everybody. So a good size of our membership, are making over 20% over 4 years, some even higher than that. There were some very good changes in the collective agreement beyond the direct wage settlement. And we were ready for a strike. I think it's really important to recognize our staff and our teams worked for months and months and months preparing for potential strike action. And as of before 4:30 yesterday, we didn't know whether that would be the case. This could be a very different press conference we're holding today, but we were prepared, and so were our members.
The deal will also see the province and union administer a new $11.4 million annual fund for recruitment and retention initiatives, with 4% increases to the fund guaranteed every year. However, the AUPE still must contend with one negotiation that has seemed to have hit a dead end. After negotiations soured between the town of Coaldale, Alberta, and their municipal employees, the town made the decision to issue a 72-hour lockout notice for their employees. In response, AUPE announced shortly after they will subsequently hit the picket lines once the lockout comes into effect on Saturday. This comes after a year-long process of attempts to negotiate a new contract. The town presented the union with a final offer, which includes a 17% wage increase over 4 years, but also included several benefit rollbacks. The union has described the offer as insultingly bad.
We've been seeing some peculiar things going on during bargaining that we don't typically see. In particular, we've had an employer that is reaching out directly to our members instead of going through the duly elected negotiating team that the members have chosen to represent them at the bargaining table. If their offer truly was 17% over 4 years with no rollbacks, I think we would have a collective agreement. Unfortunately, a lot of their market adjustments just don't apply the way they're saying they would apply. And again, we get back to the issue of rollbacks. I mean, we're seeing rollbacks in overtime language. We're seeing rollbacks in how members are able to use their sick time and bank sick time. Some of the rollbacks just are things that we cannot entertain at all. Our negotiator has attempted to say, let's get back to the table, let's deal with these rollbacks, and then we can talk about increases, but it's been crickets from the other side.
The lockout comes into effect on Saturday at 4 p.m. BCN did reach out to the town of Coaldale, but they did not respond by broadcast time. In a statement provided yesterday, the town says contingency plans will be in place to keep essential operations in place. Alberta RCMP are asking for the public's help in locating a murder suspect. Police say 35-year-old Christian Nyaburungu is wanted for first-degree murder in connection with the 2018 death of Aldane Mesquita. Her body was found in an industrial area in Strathcona County, east of Edmonton. 6 people have been charged in connection with this crime. Nyaburungu is the 7th person accused. He is also facing charges of kidnapping and aggravated assault. He is described as 6'2", 240 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. He has ties to Edmonton, North Battleford, Saskatchewan, Toronto, and he has family in Montreal. Police say he is dangerous and should not be approached by the public. Anyone with information on the whereabouts of Christian Nyaburungu is asked to call police. According to the World Metrics Library Statistics Report 2025, only about 50% of the world's population has access to a library in their community. That's why initiatives like Lethbridge Public Library's Membership Month in September matter, encouraging residents to sign up and get involved for free to explore what their library offers.
We really want to showcase what the library has this month. We have a whole bunch of crazy stuff in addition to books and videos and everything else. We have lots of learning and free access. One of the wonderful things about the library since I've been here, we've worked really hard to make the library accessible to everyone. And I think that's one of the great things that we have as a library in this society. In September, a couple cool things that are going on. Bookstop open at the Labour Ice Arena. We've got, the maker space, which is upstairs, and then that's things like you can use a 3D printer or a sewing machine, and it's really cool.
Yeah, so September 20th is the Word on the Street Festival here at the library. It's our big outdoor literary street fair where we will close off the parking lot and the streets around it here downtown at the main branch. And we will have food trucks, live music, an exhibitor marketplace, 7 stages running all day long with authors, illustrators, and presenters coming in from across Canada and locally here too. Workshop stage with some information and presentations about writing and cartooning and everything else. Also this year, it's the festival's 15th anniversary. There's 3 different things that you can do to help us celebrate our 15th anniversary this year.
According to the library manager, free membership has been in place since 2019. More than 1,600 backpacks found their way into the hands of local students for the 2025-2026 school year, thanks to the community's support of My City Cares 2024 Stuff the Bus campaign, an initiative aimed at easing the back-to-school burden for hundreds of families in Lethbridge and the surrounding area.
We had 2 really great events, hosted with our partners, the YMCA. We had a lot of resources available to families in the city that would, to help them get connected, as well as we had our street store, we had a barbecue, as well as handing out all the backpacks and school supplies for school. At the actual 2-day event, we handed out over 1,100 backpacks that day, and we had over 800. We had 800 families that attended the events. So Stuff the Bus is done. So now we're getting ready. We're starting all the works for our next program, which will be our Christmas program called Shop of Wonders. We run that in partnership with an agency called Christmas Hope, which is a bunch of different agencies in the city that we work together to try to meet the need of families needing Christmas gifts for their children.
Last year, the Stuff the Bus initiative distributed 1,703 backpacks to 865 families. A complete look at our local and national forecasts is on the way next.
Our 7-day forecast has us with some smoke still hanging in the air with a high of 20. Tomorrow we'll have a high of 20 as well, but with sunny skies. Saturday we'll have a high of 21 with sunny skies, and Sunday we'll have a high of 24 with sunny skies. Monday we'll have a high of 28. Tuesday we'll have a high of 25 with partly cloudy skies, and Wednesday we'll have a high of 22, also with partly cloudy skies. Our almanac has us with an average high of 22 for this time of year with an average low of 7. The record high on this day was set back in 2003 with 35, and the record low was set back in 1909 with -1. Sun rose at 6:51 a.m. today and set at 8:09 p.m. Our national forecast has Vancouver with some smoke hanging in the air with a high of 23, and Victoria has a high of 24 with sunny skies. Edmonton and Calgary also share sunny skies with highs of 22 and 20 respectively. The rest of the prairies have Saskatoon with a high of 18 and sunny skies. Regina and Winnipeg have partly cloudy skies, with Regina getting a high of 16 and Winnipeg a high of 15. Central Canada has Toronto and Ottawa with highs of 25, Toronto getting a partly cloudy sky, and Ottawa a nice sunny sky. Montreal will have a high of 23 also with a sunny sky. Atlantic Canada has Fredericton and Halifax having a chance at showers, with Halifax having a high of 22 and Fredericton a high of 23. Charlottetown will have a high of 25 with partly cloudy skies, and finishing off the national forecast with St. John's, we have a high of 22 and sunny skies.
Farming experts say producers have big decisions ahead of them next year as Chinese tariffs on Canadian canola products continue to hamper cash prices of the crop. Market analysts say while future prices are down slightly, the cash price farmers receive is much lower. The drop has resulted in farmers losing at least $140 million on their canola in the last 2 weeks. The drop is much steeper, around $800 million, when compared with March. China imposed a 100% tariff on canola oil and meal that month. Beijing has also slapped a tariff of nearly 76% on canola seed, a move seen in response to Canada imposing a 100% duty on Chinese-made electric vehicles. For farmers planning to grow canola next year, it will depend on market forces and their land management practices. Chris Davison of the Canola Council of Canada says canola has been a profitable crop, and the council will try to ensure producers can find other markets should problems with China persist. The country's merchandise trade deficit narrowed to $4.9 billion in July as exports rose and imports fell. Statistics Canada says the result compared with a revised deficit of $6 billion in June. It came as exports rose to $61.9 billion, with exports of energy products boosted by an increase in crude oil exports. Exports of motor vehicles and parts increased in July, as Statistics Canada says seasonal stoppages at the auto assembly plants were less severe this year because of the production slowdown caused by, among other things, U.S. tariffs. DeRosier Automotive Consultants say the auto market has started to show signs of stress from the broader economic slowdown and trade disputes. The firm estimates 160,000 vehicles were sold in August, down 2.9% from last year. It's the first year-over-year sales decline since February. DeRosier says sales are still well below pre-pandemic levels for August, which exceeded 180,000 vehicles between 2017 and 2019. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 164 points on the day to 28,915. The Dow was up 650 points to 45,621. The S&P 500 was up 53 to 6502, and the Nasdaq was up 209 points to finish at 21,707. West Texas Intermediate oil was down 63 cents to 63.34 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 1 cent to 3.09 U.S. Gold was down $13.67 to $35.4563 U.S. an ounce, and silver was down 54 cents to $40.65 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $7.16 per bushel. Barley is at $5.44. Canola is at $13.98, and corn is at $7.29 per bushel. Live cattle October contract was down $1.37 to $236.95. Feeder cattle were down $2.25 to $359.82. Lean hogs October contract was up $1.20 to $95.02, and the Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at $72.40 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, members of the Hollow Water First Nation in Manitoba are in a state of shock after a mass stabbing. 2 people are dead and 7 others were wounded in 2 separate attacks early this morning in the community about 200 kilometers northeast of Winnipeg. RCMP say an 18-year-old female was killed, and the attacker was her brother, who died later in a crash with a police cruiser. The attack comes 3 years to the day after a mass stabbing on the James Smith Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, which left 11 people dead. A story coming out of Ontario where a homeowner defended himself against an armed intruder and is now facing criminal charges, has Canadians wondering if they can defend their homes against such an attack without prosecution. Cara Lebenson, a criminal defense lawyer, sheds some light on Canada's self-defense law. That's coming up next. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or YouTube channel anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. Ever since news got out that a man in Lindsay, Ontario got charged with aggravated assault after defending himself from an armed criminal who broke into his home at 3 a.m., there's been a flurry of debate over how far the right to defend oneself goes. Should Canadians have the right to defend their homes with lethal force? Well, joining us today to discuss this and more is Lethbridge criminal defense lawyer Cara Lebenson. She's with the law firm Strategic Criminal Defense. Good to have you with us, Cara.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be here.
Yeah, well, a lot of people voicing anger, of course, frustration that a person getting charged for defending himself from an armed intruder, right? So here's the basics, as far as I know so far about this case. The alleged intruder, Michael Breen, has a criminal record. He was on probation, and there already was a warrant out for his arrest. So not generally speaking an all-around good guy, probably, right? So he's armed with a crossbow, and the homeowner, Jeremy McDonald, wakes up 3 a.m., finds this guy in his apartment. An altercation breaks out. McDonald uses a knife against Breen, and he gets injured so badly, Breen does, that he needs to be airlifted to a hospital. So, did the homeowner have the right to use a knife to defend himself? And if so, you know, reasonable force, right, if that's the standard to the degree of self-defense, how do we define what that is and what isn't reasonable force?
It's a big question. And because this individual whose home was broken into has been charged, it's really going to be a question that's up to a judge or a jury or to the court. I know a lot of folks are looking for answers from members of the legal community, such as myself. And it's because it's such a personal issue for folks around Canada, the safety of their home and their family. But these cases are really so fact specific. And asking, you know, if he had the right to use a knife specifically to defend himself, that's going to depend on a variety of factors that are going to be discussed in his case in court. Now, when people are asking, do Canadians have the right to self-defense in general in scenarios like this, the answer is yes. It is enshrined in our criminal code under section 34, and you alluded to the test based on reasonableness, and yeah, I'll get into that a little bit more. That's exactly where it's laid out. So it's hard to answer the question yes or no. The real answer is it will depend on the court's analysis in applying all the very specific facts that occurred in this scenario to what the criminal code has to say about the test for self-defense.
Yeah, I guess what's reasonable, right? And again, until you get all the facts, you don't know for sure. I mean, okay, so this is at nighttime, right? So you're into somebody else's home, so it's dark, right? But the guy had a crossbow, so he's armed. So if he saw that, and if he felt threatened, and understandably, most of us would, I would think, right? You know, why would a guy have a crossbow? He's not there for target shooting, right? So that would make sense, wouldn't it, though? Would be reasonable, would it? If he feared for his life, he saw the guy had a weapon, so to grab a kitchen knife or whatever to defend yourself, would that be normally considered reasonable by a judge or a jury?
So you have outlined some of the actual factors that are listed in the criminal code that the court will assess. For example, what was the nature of the threat? Were there any weapons used, and what kind of weapons were there? Other biographical factors, such as what is the size of the intruder opposed to the person defending themselves. Other things like the duration, how much force was. The key here is proportionality. Was the response to the threat proportionate. And I've been watching the news a lot about this and hearing what folks have to say. And one of the big things that comes up is when I'm afraid for my life or for my property and my family and my home and someone's intruding, I don't have time to get out my criminal code that I don't have a copy of.
Exactly.
Making this assessment, right? That's not natural. But the law and the courts don't expect people to go through this technical assessment on the spot. There is some recognition that everyone has a different subjective response to a threat or to danger if it happens to them. And so that is going to be taken into account in court in the analysis of whether their decision of how they defended themselves is going to be lawful.
Yeah, quick question that just popped into my mind. I know I've talked to police officers in the past, and I'm not sure if that's still the case, but he was telling me as a Canadian police officer that they're trained, in a situation where they have to draw their gun and, the person doesn't respond to threats of drop the weapon or whatever, so they're being approached by somebody with a knife or a gun, whatever the case may be, there's lives in danger. They're trained to actually shoot to kill. So not to wound, not proportionality, but to get rid of the threat, to keep everybody else safe. So it sounds like those same principles wouldn't apply to the average citizen, though.
Absolutely not. You're talking about a whole other area of the law with regards to police powers. But it is interesting that you mentioned that because a lot of people, I think, naturally compare what happens in Canada to what happens in the US because it's so close to home. And the US is notorious for their very broad, right to bear arms, right to stand your ground, which is really a lot more broadly acceptable of people going to the full extent to protect themselves. That sometimes does end lethally. And so it's natural to make those comparisons, but what's important is that really that reasonable factor, because even though it's kind of annoying, people want to know answers and they hear this word reasonableness and it's so vague.
Yeah.
What that part of the test really does is it protects and safeguards us from extreme situations. For example, if the law was that you could protect yourself to any extent regardless of the outcome, maybe you have a neighbor who stumbles over to your place by accident, and if the law was you could just take out a weapon and defend yourself at any cost, that would open the floodgates to all sorts of problems. So really what this test does is it enables people to defend themselves, but it also creates limits, right? And so that's important.
Yeah, I would agree. We often do hear cases from south of the border, typically, where again somebody gets shot and maybe they were just, at the wrong address at the wrong time. I just heard about a case here a few days ago where a teenager was shot by his own family, coming home late, and they thought it was an intruder. They shot their own kid. I mean, it breaks your heart, right? So, a little common sense goes a long ways, right? And more details are coming out about this case now as well. Now, apparently, these two men knew each other before this incident. I don't know to what degree, were they friends or just kind of acquaintances? Did they work together before? Who knows, right? But that could be a significant factor, I'm assuming, right? Does that change anything?
Absolutely. And again, that is codified in the section of our criminal code. And those factors that we've talked about is the nature of the relationship between the parties. That's also something the courts will look at, because if we're trying to prevent vigilante revenge type incentives that are involved in that self-defense. So if he knew the person, if he had other motives to go above and beyond what was necessary in the circumstances to defend himself, because of that, then that's something that the court would take into consideration, right? For example, if somebody comes in with a weapon and he had a knife, I don't know the exact fact, they'll come out in court. But if he were to have stabbed the intruder and he was subdued, that's different than knowing the person being, extra angry at them because of a prior relationship or fight and going above and beyond. I'm not saying that's what happened in this case at all, because we don't know yet, but that would be an example of why their relationship would come into play.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it makes sense. Now, you mentioned earlier that even things like the size of the intruder or the size of the defendant, the person at home, the age, the physical capabilities of the folks can be a factor as to whether the force used was reasonable or not. So, for example, we hear the argument that, okay, if the intruder pushes you, you can't grab a baseball bat and hit him in the head. And initially that makes sense. But just pondering that, if you are small and he's huge, you're worried about your safety a little more than maybe the average person is, right? So would it be then reasonable to, yes, grab a baseball bat that happens to be sitting there and smack him in the head? To me, that I guess makes more sense, but what do you think?
We'd have to leave it to the judge. I know that's not the black and white answer that people want, but yeah, it's certainly relevant. Again, it goes back to that subjective belief of the threat and the level of threat, and doing what is reasonable in the circumstances and what's proportionate to defend yourself. And if if it was a smaller person defending themselves against a bigger person, and they used a means that was necessary to defend themselves, then that's something that the court would consider. They might find that it was reasonable, and there might be other factors that they found were not reasonable.
Now, because the definition of self-defense is quite subjective, is it possible that police sometimes lay charges against the homeowner as a precaution of sorts, and then kind of, like you say, leave it to the courts to figure it out later?
Absolutely. And it's really interesting that you bring that up, because in Ontario, where this case happened, the police, I would say, have much more broad discretion when laying charges. Whereas in Alberta, if this were to happen, the Crown prosecutor often gets involved at the earlier stage and has more of a say in screening whether the charge is laid. So there's more of a Crown prosecution involvement in the laying of the charges in Alberta. And so while in Ontario, they would be charged, and then you're right, the self-defense issue would only be brought up in court. This person might be held for a bail hearing. There might be all these other procedures that they'd have to go through. That's still not to say that the prosecution in Ontario might withdraw the charges before it went to trial. That's very possible. Okay. But in Alberta, there's a little bit more Crown involvement during the laying of the charges process.
Okay, good to know. I did not know that. What about the right to defend your property? So the intruder isn't in your home, but it's maybe on your property trying to steal something, that sort of thing. What can you do and what can't you do in that case? I mean, I'm assuming you can't just get out a gun and start shooting at them, right?
That's right. It's very, very similar analysis. And, if you don't feel like your life is in danger and, somebody's trying to take your property, then that same standard is going to be applied. Are you using reasonable mechanisms in the circumstance to defend your property, or have you gone above and beyond? Maybe you've used means that are more appropriate for if it was a home invasion, or if your life was in danger. So again, very fast, specific, and similar test though.
Right. And we have a number of politicians, of course, speaking out on this. It's great political fodder, saying that we need to change our laws to be more favorable to the homeowner to be able to defend themselves without worrying about getting charged. And I think most people emotionally agree with that, right? But, is that going to help? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so anytime we have an issue like this that really speaks to people's emotions, like I mentioned at the beginning, a very personal issue, keeping ourselves, our homes, and our family safe. How more personal does it get than that? Our home is our castle, has been said. However, we have to remember that it's easy for politicians to use these kinds of issues to garner support and popularity and votes. And it's often that they don't really delve into what the law really is. I haven't heard any of the politicians give a concrete answer, on exactly how they want to change the law, because this self-defense law in the code actually was amended a few years ago, I think, during Stephen Harper. So it's my opinion that this is a comprehensive and appropriate test that while it's unfortunate that somebody who was in a situation of being a victim might end up getting charged, there are mechanisms to get down to the bottom of what happened. And
okay. Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what other details come out once it gets to court. You know, and might make more sense to all of us once that comes out. But okay. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much, Kara.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Always a pleasure.
Oh, you bet. Kara Lebenson is a Lethbridge criminal defense lawyer with the law firm Strategic Criminal Defense. We continue to interview candidates looking to represent Lethbridge on City Council. Today, we have the opportunity to chat with Mike Schmittler. So good to have you with us, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Paul.
Yeah, this will be fun. Relax.
You said that. I don't know if it's going to be fun, but let's do it.
I do feel for you. You know, everybody comes in here and you know, into the political realm for the first time. In your case, I believe.
Absolutely.
You know, on camera. What do I do? So, well, tell us first of all. I guess you know, why are you taking the jump into the boiling cauldron here? You know, of the political realm. What kind of experience to bring with you? You know, that would equip you for the job.
I would boil it down to three things. You know, why I'm running. So I think first of all, I'm a good listener. And we'll get into why I think that's true. I've got the experience for the job. I worked for a very large organization. It was Lethbridge. I think a lot of people know that
concrete company.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where concrete leadership comes from.
Very
so
clever. Okay.
So from Lethbridge. And the third thing is that experience. I think I was asked a lot of very hard questions, so I know how to ask hard questions. I know that council is a governance board. It's not an operational board, and it is a board. You know, it directs a very big corporation.
Yeah.
So, you know, my job is to ask the city manager good questions, right? And I think I'm well suited to do that. So, so maybe we'll just get into a little bit of detail. So,
sure.
You know, we've done 10,000 of these so far.
Okay.
We've been door knocking. I've done personally myself about a quarter of those.
Mm-hmm.
I have to admit, I was not looking forward to that part of the of the endeavor, but
the door knocking, you mean, or just
that it's unnerving. It's difficult to walk up to somebody's door and knock and say I'm running for council.
Right.
But if you throw yourself into it, it's going to school. You know, you really do learn what's on people's minds. So I've been doing that, and I have to tell you, two recurring things come up. I have to say that, you know, people say they don't want another bike lane that serves a few dozen people. They want a third bridge. You know, that's just a really simple line.
So kind of thumbs down, generally speaking, to the bike lanes, but people are wanting the third bridge, even despite the costs?
Yeah. Well, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
We'll get into
No,
they don't want their taxes to go up, but they want a third
exactly.
bridge. But we're going to get into some ways that we can maybe do that, right? So that was one thing. Exhibition Park, of course, comes up. But it comes up in the context of, you know, is my money being spent wisely? You know, that's the context. And then the overarching thing is always that they feel that their taxes are too high and that they're not being spent wisely. It was a thing my dad taught me. My dad was a plumber. And what he taught me was the rule of 72. And it's really, really simple. You take, let's say you have $10,000 to invest in a GIC and you get 5%. I'll make this quick, Paul, I promise. How long does it take for your money to double? So that 5% GIC, you take 72 divided by the interest rate and you get 14. So your $10,000 becomes $20,000 in 14 years. But it also works for costs. So I think the thing that people should know is we think that you get a 5% increase, you go, what's the big deal? It's 5%. Well, the big deal is that if the current inflation rate is 2%, you know, that's what it's advertised at. So you're 3% above that, right? So 5%, if you just do that simple rule of 72, 72 divided by 5, your taxes will double in 14 years. The simple math on, let's say your taxes are $4,000 today. At a 5% increase, in 14 years, they're $8,000. In 28 years, another 14 years, they're $16,000. And compare that with if it was only 2%, if it was only at the rate of inflation, current rate of inflation, it would take 36 years for your taxes to go from $4,000 to $8,000. At that same 36 years, you'd be comparing $8,000 at 2% inflation. With 5%, your taxes would be $24,000, starting at that same $4,000. I know that takes up a little bit of our time here in the interview, but I did a video on it on my Facebook page. I hope people go and take a look at that. But it's really, really important. I think when people look at it and they say, well, it's just a 5% increase, what's the problem? The problem is year over year over year over year, the compounding impact of that. And it's why it's so important that governments everywhere, not just municipally, but federally and provincially, that they have to scrutinize their costs. They have to look for better ways to do things so that we can at least stay within the rate of inflation.
Yeah, I mean, taxes is a huge issue in every election. And so the question is, how can we either keep them where they're at or actually start decreasing taxes? But when you do that, of course, there's always demand from the public for more services and so forth, right?
Absolutely.
Again, are they necessary services? Well, again, that's debatable, right? So how would you go about decreasing taxes, if at all?
Yeah, great question. And so decreasing taxes is pretty tough. So I don't go out there promising anything to anybody, but I do have some practical experience. So one of the things I would tell you is in running a business, especially the business that we ran here in Lethbridge, I had the privilege of working with, not directly with the city, but indirectly. The city put out a contract, sidewalk, curb and gutter. When it needs to be replaced, it cracks up in front of your house. It isn't a city employee that comes out and replaces that. It's a contractor that comes out.
Okay.
It'd be McNally or Tallstrip, others have bid on that contract. But the city's done that for decades. And I can tell you, because I supplied concrete to at least one of those contractors, it was a really, really, really competitively bid contract. The margins were razor thin.
Okay.
And yet, when you go to something like paving, and this is the paving season, as we're all well aware, you go around and I think they do good work. I'm not making any comment about the quality of the work, but it's all city employees. It's city paving equipment. It's city trucks. It's all city employees. And I think that can be, why could that not be contracted out? It's just an example, but it's a lived example. It's not theoretical, it's one that I've actually lived.
So that, in your view, that could actually reduce the city's costs and again, reduce taxes potentially?
Absolutely, and I think, there's always been this misnomer that when you, if you do something a different way, you're automatically reducing the level of service. And I don't buy that. I don't buy that. The sidewalk, curb and gutter work that I've seen looks very, very good. So I think that contracting out is a potential. And Paul, what I would say is, if I'm aware of that through my business experience, that's just one example. There's likely dozens of other examples where we could look at contracting out. We could look at doing things a different way than we currently do it. And let me just add some meat on those bones. And I took a fair bit of flack when I put this on my Facebook page, but Coaldale, for instance, they put out a comparison of 8 municipalities and what the salaries and wages are per capita, right? So they just take the total bill and they divide it by the number of people. And that way you can compare community against community. Now, I'm not vouching for what municipalities they picked, but in that comparison, Lethbridge was number 1. We had the highest salaries and wages per capita. They had, now they looked really good in that one. They were the lowest, and they picked the comparators, of course. But that wasn't the important thing to me, that they were less than half of ours. But that Lethbridge was 48% higher than the average of all 8. Now, anybody can go and they can do that comparison, and I would welcome anyone to do that. But Coaldale puts it right on their website. And that's why I bring up, when you ask me the question, there is a way that I'm aware of with some contracting out that I think we can provide at least the same level of service, and I think we can provide it at a lower cost. But when you look at one of the biggest challenges I think Lethbridge has, it's around salaries and wages. And so I think that's the.
Are you hearing that? Sorry to interrupt you. Are you hearing that from the doorstep, as you're knocking on doors, saying, we're paying employees too much, or?
Here's how I would answer it. Both on the doorstep and from business people that I know.
Okay.
I don't know of a business person in Lethbridge that doesn't have a story of an employee being picked off by the city of Lethbridge at way more money than they could pay. I have an example of it. Great guy, maintenance guy. I probably shouldn't bring that up because you can figure out who he is.
Okay.
But great guy. We really hated to lose him, but we didn't have a prayer of meeting that kind of a wage.
Right.
And so they came to the city, as they should, right? They should seek out the best compensation.
Yeah, well, of course, personally, we want to do our best, right? But yeah. Okay.
But as a taxpayer, do I really want to be competing against my own tax dollars? So that was one of the things that I wanted to point out. So it's a bit of a harsh thing to say, but if you're struggling to keep your wages and salaries under control, maybe you should have less wages and salaries to control. And you do that through things like contracting out.
Okay. Well, we're up against the clock a bit here. I wanted to throw this out as well. Your thoughts on, again, the homeless situation in our city. Always a concern for our residents here, because it tends to bring with it, there's addiction issues there, and crime and violence and, drugs and so forth that comes along with it. Any thoughts briefly on how to address that? Yeah, so it's a big nut to crack. And again, I always want to come back to, I don't want to cut the services that, we need all these services. If I've learned anything knocking on doors, is there's a lot of need out there. But two things. The supervised consumption site, to me, was just like the movie. If you build it, they will come. And that's what happened. I remember asking people at the time, well, if you don't want the supervised consumption site here, do you want 188 people to lose their jobs? Well, no, that's not the goal. But the goal isn't that. The goal is to solve the problem, right? Yep. And so I think what happens is, and we do this in many ways, but the supervised consumption site was the best example of it, that if you overbuild those facilities, you shouldn't be surprised that people come from all over the province to our city. And that is exactly what happened. And the other thing I would say is, I talk to businesses right near the homeless. I go and I knock on the doors. Our business was not far from the homeless shelter. And what they overwhelmingly say is, it's the same repeat offenders that keep coming back and are continuing to reoffend. And it's a handful, right? The vast majority they're just down on their luck, or they're addicted or whatnot, and we need to help them as much as we can. But there's a handful that we need to take off the streets. And that's a hard thing to say, but they can't be on the streets. So, interesting. So I did want to say a couple things about the third bridge. We're up against the clock, but sure, talk a bit about the bridge, because, people want it, obviously. You bet. It'd be great to have one, but the costs, of course, and that's going to impact the tax burden, right? Probably? For sure, but I think the alignment makes it impacts it a lot. I think the alignment needs to be something that incorporates the airport and ties together economic growth in Lethbridge. So if we took that route much further south, first of all, the crossing would be a lot lower, down in the Popson Park area, for instance. We could build that bridge a lot cheaper than the original alignment. We can tie it together with the airport, and that way you can attract federal, provincial, and private funding to do development around that airport area. One other thing I wanted to add, if I really can, really quickly here, Paul, is on my website, I have a picture of a trailer that says, "Why did the chicken cross the road?" Do you know the trailer I'm talking about? It's on 43rd Street North. Okay. So the point of it is that on the east side of 43rd Street, on the north side of the highway, is the county. And what that trailer is pointing out is the taxes are way lower in the county than they are in the city of Lethbridge. Well, I went and looked it up, Paul, and the reason I'm bringing this up is, if we want to expand the tax base of Lethbridge, the hospital, the university, and the college don't pay taxes, and they shouldn't, right? And they're jewels. That's why people like my family came here. But we do need to expand the tax base. Otherwise, all of those costs for all those services are going to be borne increasingly by taxpayers. And so when you look at where would you expand it to?
So the point I'm making is, you can simply do an internet search, is what I did. Is I did an internet search to find out what business taxes are compared to other places. And there was only one. Edmonton was the only place I could find with higher business taxes than here. The point I'm making is, if you want to attract business to expand your tax base to pay for all those services, you can't have some of the highest business taxes. Okay. And just really quickly, Lethbridge County is 41% of our taxes, 41%. Coaldale is 47%. Tabor is 52%. Claresholm, 53%. Brooks, 62%. If you want to attract businesses so that we can pay for all the services that we really cherish, you've got to be competitive on your business taxes so we can grow that tax base.
And I am out of time, so I've got to leave it there.
I got
Mike.
it in, Paul.
But Mike, very interesting perspective, so thanks for sharing that. Appreciate it.
If I can just add, lethbridgemike.ca is my website, and Lethbridge Mike 2025 on Facebook, Instagram, and Gmail.
All right. Excellent. Mike Schmidtler, our guest here today. And on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thank you so much for watching.